Hello world, it's Berto Prey 5 Cupla, and welcome to my review, reaction, and commentary on Star Trek Strange New Worlds, Season 2, Episode 2, Ad Astra per Aspera. Aspera, I don't know, it's Latin. There's a translation, it comes later. This is the episode where Una, number one, Rebecca Romaine, is on trial for her life. Well, at least her career. She has been found out to be an Illyrian, and what that even means, to be completely honest, I'm still struggling to figure out, because the Illyrians were a race that we first met in Star Trek Enterprise. They were the unfortunate people in the Delphic Expanse that Captain Archer had to steal a warp core from so that Enterprise could save Earth. They looked nothing like humans. There was zero backstory on them having any type of genetic engineering that I'm aware of. And yet, for all the time Strange New Worlds decides to create completely new aliens that are exactly the same as aliens that already existed, such as last week when they created a new race of long-living humanoids that look exactly like humans when they already had Illyrians, but they decided to create lanthanites that are practically, best we can tell, the same species. For this reason, for some reason, they decided to reuse the Illyrians, which again looked nothing like humans, seemed to have nothing in common with the plot that they're trying to get over on, but just reuse the name. I have no idea the logic here. But moving on from that, so Una, who was number one, who again was a woman from the original Star Trek, the episode that never got aired, The Cage, with Captain Pike and number one and Spock, and they go to Talos for, and the only reason we even know that that episode existed was because in the original series, which did get picked up, they kind of ran out of money, and they needed something to air, so they had this episode that was already cut, and the network didn't like it. The powers that be said that this episode it wasn't good enough to air on TV, so they had them remake it. And the second time they did it, of course, we got Captain Kirk and Dr. McCoy, and a much better. You got Uhura, the real Uhura, not the Uhura in this episode, and we got a much better show, and that one got picked up. But they had this whole episode, so they cut it up into the menagerie, parts 1 and 2, and so Captain Pike and number one, they became canon Star Trek characters, and we had this whole thing about the Enterprise existing before Captain Kirk became captain, and so, to us Trek fans, it was always something interesting. Oh, there was a captain before Kirk. There was a number one who was a woman, and that was, it was something progressive. It was good to see. Yeah, okay, we can work with that. Yeah, that was nice. But then nobody ever expecting that somebody would years, decades later, go back and make a TV show based on what was just a cut up episode. And then they decide that it's not enough to make a series, a new series. They want to slither their way into everything that we love about the original series and take credit for it. Like steal the Gorn, and they'll take the Gorn to be their own, and they'll steal the Klingons, and they'll steal everything. I'm sure by the time it's done, it's what Discovery did, and it's what Strange New Worlds is doing. But, okay, let's take a step back. This episode, Season 2, Episode 2 of Strange New Worlds, far better episode than last week. Okay, I honestly, it didn't. There are painful parts, and we'll talk about it. But if I had to rate the two, this episode is a decent episode of sci-fi. I don't know if it's a decent episode of Star Trek, but it is an episode of Star Trek. They took what should have been a 5 or 10, maybe 15-minute scene and made it the entire episode. This whole episode is a courtroom drama in space, and I'm guessing that the writers are probably used to writing Earth courtroom type shows. So maybe this is their strong point. When they don't have to use a lot of techno babble. Although they're not particularly great at the law, and there are certainly some serious issues where that gotcha moment in the case, or the case is cracked and you see, oh, this is where they're going from. They were about to lose to now they're guaranteed win. But at the end, you're like, wait, if this is true, then everything we heard in the first 15 minutes makes no sense. And I feel like I'm currently at that point where you're like, you making no sense, and you're right. So let's introduce our characters for today. The big new person, who is only going to be here, obviously, for this one episode. Oh, and speaking of characters introduced, you guys know last week they introduced Commander Pelly, the new chief engineer, played by Carol Kane. Not at all in this episode. Not at all. Never mentioned. Not even a glance on camera. Forget she was ever here. She is not in this episode. So today we get Counselor Nira Katal, who is the greatest civil rights lawyer in the galaxy. She is the Johnny Cochran of the galaxy. She is where Captain Pike headed off to go get her, even though she was, quote unquote, across the quadrant. It only took 2.5 days by shuttle to reach her. However, as it turns out, she really wasn't across the quadrant. She was in the Volterra Nebula, and the Volterra Nebula used to be part of the Delphic Expanse from Star Trek Enterprise, and we know Enterprise could not have been anywhere near the other side of the quadrant. They were a good distance for a ship at the time, but nowhere near the other side of the quadrant, or the Federation even for that much. So, 2.5 days for a shuttlecraft to get where the Warp 5 Enterprise, which, didn't actually do Warp 5, did more like Warp 4, took, I don't know, a month or so to get to. Maybe I could believe it, I guess, a little bit. So that was just bad dialogue for last time. Anyway, Counselor Nira Katal is this hotshot defense lawyer. We have Captain Batel, who is the prosecutor, and Captain Batel was Captain Pike's, let's say, friend with benefits. I wouldn't say girlfriend. He's just another starship captain that Captain Pike and her like to have private time together with from time to time when their schedules allow it. So they're friends and friends with benefits. We get introduced to a Vice Admiral Pasalk, who is a Vulcan, appears to be the Judge Advocate General. And it turns out that we'll get to it, but he is a friend of Sarek, of Spock's father, of course. But let's say this. The episode opens with a young girl, and she has a terrible wound on her leg. You can see the bone. It's bad. It is bad. And you have her parents arguing over taking her to the hospital. And her mother's like, we got to take her to the hospital or she's going to die. And the father's like, no, we can't go to the hospital. If we go to the hospital, we're going to lose everything. They're going to figure it out. And the dad's just like, don't worry, she'll be okay. Una will be okay. And we realize the little girl is Una. Little girl is Una. So this is Una's childhood. And the mother's like almost crying. And Una herself is overhearing this. And the mother's saying she's going to die. And Una's like, Mom, well, help. And the mother comes over and she's like, no, you'll be okay. We'll figure it out. And the father's like, yeah, we'll figure something out. And they just keep repeating to themselves, Una will be okay. And Una's, last season, we found out that Una, one of Una's genetic enhancements is that her body can fight off infection without antibiotics. That her superpower was the ability to heal itself, and specifically mentioned that her body could burn off bacteria or whatever, so she doesn't get infection. She was her own natural antibiotic. And when she glowed, it was the body literally healing itself and killing off the microbes. But for some reason, I guess she was too young yet. She didn't have the power completely. So she was actually getting an infection that her body couldn't fight off in this particular opening scene. Anyway, apparently she was okay, because that Una will be okay morphs into the quote-unquote current day, and you have Una with her public defender. The public defender is, of course, an incompetent white man, obviously. And Una is, of course, smarter than him, because, of course, she is. And anyway, so it's Una, her ineffective counsel, and Captain Batel, who is Pike's friend with benefits. And Batel offers a deal, a good deal. She says, listen, you're looking at years in prison, but Starfleet is willing to make a deal. You accept a dishonorable dismissal, dishonorable discharge, and that's it. It'll be over. No prison, nothing else. You leave Starfleet. You're free to be a Federation citizen. You can still do anything you want. We're not going to come after you. Just leave Starfleet, and that's it. We part ways. And her public defender, I say public defender because I mean it's the closest I can come up with. You know, Starfleet provided her with counsel. You know, in a future where we don't know if there's even money, it's hard to know how this works. But Starfleet gave her counsel. Her counsel says, yeah, this is a damn good deal. You should take it. And Una is like, don't you think we should sidebar this conversation? Like, you know, we don't want to talk about it in front of the prosecutor, who's the one offering you the deal. And of course, the guy like looks down and all sad. He's like, oh my God, she's so much better at my own job than I am. Wah, wah, wah. And then Captain Batel, who's obviously also a woman, says, you know, talk it over with your counselor, let me know. And Una is like, how can he counsel me when he works for you? And like, he doesn't work. He doesn't work for Captain Batel. They both happen to work for Starfleet, which currently so do you. Or at least, you know, you worked for Starfleet too until you were arrested 2 weeks ago. So don't go off on your fucking high horse. How can you be my counsel when he works for you? Well, you want to still remain part of Starfleet. That's your, anyway, so then we go to Captain Pike. And for those of you who don't suffer, you might know people who do, but you know what a CPAP mask looks like, maybe. That's a mask that people wear if they have sleep apnea and they're on that machine that helps you not die when you sleep. Well, Captain Pike is just wearing a CPAP mask, walking on a planet that looks like any major city. And he goes into an office building, and it turns out it's the law offices of Counselor Nira Katol, aka Space Johnny Cochran, and the secretary there is telling him that there's, you know, the counselor Katol is busy today. She has no openings. He should have made an appointment. All the stuff to get him to just leave. And he refuses. He's like, I'll wait. I've got time. And the secretary is getting annoyed. And you can tell she just doesn't want to let him in for whatever reason. And he's also, though, he's not going to leave. But then an alarm starts going off. And he says he only has 2% of oxygen left. Now, if the alarm doesn't go off till you have 2% oxygen, you would think that that 2% would at least last 10, 15, 20 minutes, you know, time to let you get back to wherever you have to be so you don't, you know, die. But apparently the 2% alarm means you have about 2 minutes left of oxygen. So even though he says he's got, and he says he can wait, the secretary's like, I don't think you can wait. The alarm's going off. He's like, I can wait. She's like, I don't think you can. and he still refuses to move. And then it goes down to 1%. And finally, the secretary gets all upset and runs into the office where Counselor Cattol is. And I guess they don't want to. I guess if Captain Pike dies in the waiting room, that's going to bring some bad publicity. So finally, they thankfully that Cattol really was in her office and not actually away, and they bring him in. And also, thankfully, Cattol has the ability to just move a dial on her wall or her computer, and it changes the oxygen. It changes the atmosphere. Within an instant, Captain Pike is laying almost on the floor because he can't breathe. And then within an instant, the entire atmosphere changes. And Cattol is like, oh, it's okay. You can breathe now. So this entire time, the atmosphere could have been perfectly fine, that both Cattol and that humans could breathe it. It's like they just purposely keep the atmosphere toxic to humans because they don't like humans. And it turns out that's exactly true. The entire reason for the atmosphere being the way it is because she's Illyrian. Now, she's an Illyrian like Una in that she looks human, but she's Illyrian unlike Una is that she doesn't like humans. So the entire point of keeping the atmosphere poisonous to humans is to just keep humans away because fuck them, basically. So yeah, so when they're in the office, what's her? Cattol, Nira Cattol. We'll call her Nira. So Nira is talking and basically just insulting Pike every chance she can get. She's like, I knew you were persistent. I didn't know you were stupid, too. And do they not teach you how to read the room at the academy? And Pike is like, it's been so long since I've been at the academy. I must have forgotten. Anyway, she's like, we're Illyrians. We don't want you here. And she didn't say it in so many words, but the point is, she's like, okay, fine, you're here. Like, what do you want? And Pike is like, listen, I get it. He's like, I'm down. I'm basically, Pike goes out of his way to show that he's woke. Okay. Illyrians are the fill-in for whatever you want. Whatever race, gender, sexual identity is currently is being oppressed today. That's what the Illyrians represent. Okay, they're a little bit Mexican for wanting asylum. They're a little bit transgender for people being quote unquote scared of their practices. They're a little bit gay. They're a little bit every color of the rainbow of the pride flag, I guess. That's what the Illyrians represent. And, a lot of them don't want to deal. They don't even want to be part of the Federation because they're like, the Federation, has terrible, awful laws against genetic engineering. And, they're part, to be frank, part African American, part Muslim, part everything. Every group that has traditionally been oppressed that we hear about in 2023, they're part Illyrian. We're using the Illyrians to show how awful the United States has been to all these other groups. And I mean, basically, they confuse Federation history with U.S. history more than once. They basically go from U.S. history to Federation history and back again without ever pointing out that the laws of the United States of America are not the laws and policies of the United Federation of Planets. So Pike has to explain to Nira that he gets why Illyrians apparently dislike Starfleet. And he's like, listen, I've been to an abandoned Illyrian colony once. And as it turned out, it wasn't so abandoned. He saw firsthand what happened to Illyrians who reverse their genetic modifications just so the Federation will accept them. But that doesn't really make any sense. If the Illyrians reversed their genetic modifications, then why were they on an abandoned colony? If it was so the Federation would accept them, then wouldn't by definition they have been not abandoned? I don't know. It seems like the people who would have been at an abandoned colony were the ones who refused to make the genetic modifications, but whatever. Captain Pike stands up as a white man and bravely says, "We were wrong. I was wrong." And Nira says, "Well, congratulations. You learned empathy. But how about the rest of Starfleet?" And she literally says, Starfleet's race laws are draconian. And that Una was lucky not to get charged with sedition. Now, sedition means something, at least it used to. Sedition is when you, by speech or action, you try to get people to rebel against the government or the state or the monarchy or whatever the authority is of power. So how would nothing Una has done, at least nothing she's done on camera, would come close to sedition? She didn't go out, she didn't yell for the masses to unite and come rescue her, that she's being held illegally, and that any law-abiding citizen's duty is to fight to get her out. She's done nothing of the kind. So why they would even throw in sedition, I have my theories. I think you can imagine what they are, but suffice to say, that was some pretty poor writing to say, oh, she could be charged with sedition. Anyway, Captain Pike manages to beg Nira to come and finally convinces her that apparently she doesn't have the best record when taking on Starfleet, and that if she comes and does this case, she would get a lot of recognition. He says half the quadrant would learn about you, and basically that this is going to be a very public case, and you should take it so you can get your message out. Her message, of course, being that Illyrians are people too, and it's wrong for the Federation to prohibit them, I guess. This is another episode where there's some confusion between, I think, what are the decisions of Starfleet and what are the decisions of the Federation. Like Starfleet, I don't think Starfleet has a code of conduct, but Starfleet doesn't make the law. The Federation makes the law. Starfleet has its rules. Now she's being charged with a Starfleet violation, whereas the other stuff appears to be Federation law. And I don't know. It just it doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense. But whatever. Pike is successful, and Nira, I guess, comes back with him to the Enterprise, which I guess is at the space dock where, where this trial is happening. We don't ever see the Enterprise get there. We assume that they're just in orbit. I mean, the trial is happening on Earth. It appears to be on Earth. It appears to be in San Francisco. So, I mean, I guess the Enterprise is just in orbit of Earth because they go back and forth between what's going on the Enterprise. Pike goes up to the Enterprise to sleep and eat. So I'm assuming the Enterprise is in orbit of Earth. Several several crew members end up being called as witnesses, and they're assumingly right there. So I'm guessing the Earth certainly in orbit of Earth, although we don't ever see the Enterprise in orbit or in a space dock, but whatever. So we're in the mess hall of the Enterprise, and Ortega's and Dr. M'Benga are at one table, and they're watching Spock and Admiral or Vice Admiral Pasok talk in the mess hall. And they are, two Vulcans, so they are both sitting upright and looking at each other. There's no real emotion at all to go after. They appear to just be talking, and Ortega's is jokingly making up a conversation between the two of them. And she's like saying, the Admiral is saying to Spock, well, you see, Spock, it's only logical that your friend have to go to prison because she lied. And she says, and then she makes up Spock saying, oh, yes, it's very logical. I agree 100%. Would you want to play Calto this weekend? And the Admiral says, oh, yes, that would be enjoyable. And Dr. M'Benga stops her and says, you can't see it, but Vulcans give away a lot in their body language. And Ortega's is like, are you serious? Like, are you, and M'Benga's like, no, I am. And he's like, you can tell these two Vulcans hate each other. And like, he's right. He's obviously written, the script is written so that M'Benga is obviously wise to this, and M'Benga is correct. But I don't see anything. I don't see anything that could actually be telling us that. So, and Ortega's also is like, I still think that, wait, are you serious? And so at the end, Spock gets up, looks perhaps the slightest bit annoyed, walks over to the table where M'Benga and Ortega's was, which is weird because they were quite a distance and there were so many other people in the mess hall. Why did he go just to their table? I don't know. And he looks at the doctor and Ortega's, and he says, I'm sorry you had to witness that outburst. And of course, there was no outburst. And Dr. Mbanga is like serious, and Ortega's realizes that he's serious. And Dr. Mbanga says, "Don't worry, Spock, we won't tell anybody. Our lips are sealed." And Ortega's like, "Yeah, she's serious." She, does the sign for zipped lips. And Spock is like, "Thank you." And he's like, of all his father's former colleagues, he hates that guy the most, or something like that. Now, besides that being like an emotion, the bigger problem here is that he brings up his father. Do you remember in the original series Journey to Babel, nobody knew who Spock's father was. Nobody knew that Ambassador Sarek was Spock's father, including Captain Kirk, including Dr. McCoy, and I would say including Uhura. That if Uhura knew that Ambassador Sarek was Spock's father, she might have said that, "Hey, by the way, Captain, you do know that the ambassador we're picking up, that's Spock's dad, don't you?" But no. And so nobody knew. Spock didn't speak about his father or his parents. But I guess he did now. How you can't, I mean, if you retcon this, there's just no way. So big continuity break for me. I realize to the writers, to new Trek, this is just like, a minor nitpick from somebody who can't realize that we've made progress. Well, no, this is a fucking big deal. Okay, this was a big deal for Spock. The entire premise of that episode, the giant reveal that Sarek was Spock's father, is now compromised. And this is yet another reason that Strange New Worlds chips away at the original series. So this is another original series episode that can't be as good as it used to if you accept Strange New Worlds as Trek happening in the same universe. Okay. I'll get over it, but I'm going to bring it up. I'm going to bring it up. I have to. So Captain Pike and Captain Batel, his girlfriendish, are eating also in the mess hall, and Batel tricks Captain Pike into letting his guard down, and she first asks him about, when did he meet Una? And Captain Pike goes into a story about how he was giving a speech to the graduating class at the academy, and Una came up to him after and said that he made a mistake when he was doing a re-entry, and she was the only person that came up to him and told him he was wrong, and it really annoyed him. But Captain April had told him that you always want a first officer who's willing to tell you you were wrong. So apparently, I guess, Captain Pike pulled Una out of her graduating class, brought her aboard the Enterprise, and at some point made her first officer. Anyway, Captain Batel laughs and says, "Yeah, Admiral April gave her the same advice." But then, now that his guard was down, she's like, "And when, Captain, did you find out that Una was whatever the fuck, genetically augmented Illyrian?" And he gets more serious. She's like, "No, tell us, Captain. You're under oath. Remind you, you're under oath. You cannot lie. And you have to answer the question. When did you find out?" And Pike gets serious, and he realizes what she did, and he's like, okay, You win. I get it. And she's like, I don't know that you do. She's like, this is why you can't be on the stand. Okay, because Pike really wanted to go on the stand to fight for Una and to say how great she was and how important she was to the ship and to him. And Batel basically shows him that if he goes up on the stand, he's going to lose, or he could be brought into this, and he's going to just ruin the case and probably lose his own command as well if he ever took the stand. So he realizes that he can't take the stand. And she once again tells him that you might not believe me, and because Pike is treating Batel like the enemy, because Batel was the one whose job it was to arrest Una, even though it wasn't her choice. She was, quote, just following orders. And she's like, you don't believe me, but everything I'm doing is to help you and to help Una. And, the deal that she should have taken to literally get no jail time and just walk away with a dishonorable discharge, that would have been better for everybody. It would have been better for Una. It would have been better for you. And it would have been better for the whales, as always. But, of course, Una can't take that. Una needs to make some type of stand. And, so Pike is just disgusted. He's angry. He's not happy. And whatever. He's like, nothing he can do. He realizes there's nothing he can do. So now, the lawyer comes to the Enterprise, and she sets up in Una's quarters. Captain Pike tells her to use Una's quarters, and La'an Noonien Singh, she's the one who brings Nira to Una's quarters and tells her that Captain Pike says to set up here. And Nira looks at an old photograph, and we can see it's a picture of Una with her parents. It's the same kid and parents that we saw at the opening shot, when her leg was broken. And so we know it was her as a kid, and Nira looks at it and kind of smiles. And we're realizing all this time we've been told Nira is Una's friend. Nira is Una's old friend. And we start to realize that Nira and Una had some type of falling out. We don't know why, we don't know when, but they were old friends. And you see the picture of Una as a kid, and you can imagine, okay, she's remembering her friend as a kid at that point. So we don't know when or why they broke up. They had a falling out, but we're getting little bits and little pieces throughout the story. La'an asks Nira, she's like, listen, do you know about this court case, Starfleet versus Wick? And Nira is like, I'm like the best civil rights attorney in the quadrant. Of course I know Starfleet versus Wick. And it's basically the case that says, if the evidence used against somebody is gotten illegally, then the evidence can't be used. And even if the person was guilty, the case has to be thrown out because the evidence was tainted. And so, yes, of course she knows. So she's like, do you think the evidence against Una was gotten illegally? And she's like, because if it is, so she's like, well, if it was, you'd be able to make this case go away. And she's like, yeah, obviously, if it was found illegally, I could probably make this case go away. They'd probably have to dismiss the case and throw away the charges. She's like, why? Do you know something? And La'an is like, no, not yet. I'm working on it. So just give me time. So Nira's like, okay, well, you know where I'll be if you figure it out. So then La'an goes to Uhura and orders Uhura to compile all records relating to Una being a Illyrian, and over the last 12 months or something. And Uhura's like, okay, I can do that. And she's like, no, but also private logs. And Uhura's like, wait a minute. She's like, I can't do private logs without, an okay from Starfleet. And that takes months to get. She's like, wait, are you wanting me to illegally search the private logs of everybody on the ship? And La'an is like, I'm ordering you to. Yes. And Uhura, instead of saying okay, she gives this big speech about how that if she did do it, that it would be the end of La'an's career, and that she knows that Una wouldn't want La'an to ruin her career over trying to save her friend, and about how, it's not right for her to follow an illegal order, and that in the end, the illegal order would serve no gain. She's like, so if the only way to save Una is with an illegal order, then we'll just have to find some other way to save Una. And that is very respectful. It is a very good, and that's exactly what I'd want to hear from a Starfleet officer given an illegal order. And yet, if this was last week, that was the exact opposite. Because last week, Spock says, we're going to steal the Enterprise to save La'an. And Uhura is like, fuck yeah, we're going to steal the Enterprise to save La'an. Why does she say, fuck yeah, last week to an illegal order? But this week, she's like, oh no, we're just going to have to find another way. Right? Last week, if she could have said, oh, we're not going to steal the Enterprise, Mr. Spock, we're going to have to find another way. But no, last week it was fine. Fuck yeah, we're going to steal the Enterprise. This week, oh no, I can't do that. You don't want me to do that. Let's find a different way. Which, by the way, they don't. Just to be clear, they don't. Luckily, Nira figures out a way, but it has nothing to do with Uhura and Leanne, whatever the fuck her name is, Noonien Singh. Which, by the way, they double down that she is an augment, that she realizes she has the augment powers from Khan, even though she is generations and generations past Khan. She flat out admits that she still has the augment powers. La'an. And nobody notices. So anyway, court goes in session. Una pleads well, Una first says she's going to plead not guilty, and they're going to bring court in session, and it's a tribunal, so of course there's three. There's a woman in the middle who's clearly Starfleet, and then she says, and this is weird, that there's a Space Command representative, Zust Tagal, who's clearly a Tellarite, and then there's a Starfleet commander, Shiv, who's a Vulcan. But what is Space Command? So that I thought was interesting. We have Starfleet, 2 Starfleet officers, I think, or maybe 1 Starfleet, 1 Federation, and Space Command. Like, what is Space Command, and what, and why is it a Tellarite? Like, I thought, if anything, maybe Space Command would be Earth. I don't know. But so anyway, the computer reads the charges. Like, they put the old time, and this is like out of TOS, and I'll give them credit for that. They put in a tape, and the computer reads the charges. And this is a minor nitpick, but when the human was reading the charges earlier and telling Una what she faced, the person said that she was being charged with violating code 614 to 617, meaning 614, 615, 616, and 617 inclusive. But when the computer reads out what she charges she's facing, it says she's facing 614, 617, or 614, 617, as if it's a single charge or a single code. Minor, I know, but literally, like, somebody typed it in and the computer voice read it as 614, 617, where they should have typed in for the synthesis to read 614 space the word TO space 617. It's weird, but anyway, that is the code prohibiting permanent DNA modification and submitting false info to Starfleet. So Captain Batel gives an opening statement, says that, and they reconfirm the eugenics wars, and that it was the eugenics wars, the hundreds of millions dead after eugenics wars, that is the reason for them to have these laws, and that when you take DNA editing and you push it to the limits, you're playing God. We play God, and we ruin natural evolution. Now, that's a lot of bullshit, because we already ruin natural evolution. Even today, okay, natural evolution is done. Natural evolution is no longer happening with the human race, and in some ways that's a good thing. In some ways, maybe not so much, because, it's unlikely we're going to evolve further for a whole number of reasons. Medicine, society, but whatever. And anyway, Batel gives a decent opening statement as to why the laws are in place to prohibit DNA resequencing. And then Neera gives her opening statement. And wow, does she ever give a great opening statement. Now, don't get me wrong, she is speaking in the future of, what's happened to the Illyrians. So she has facts on her side, but you could easily see her statement being adjusted to be used for any race or any creed or any people that were denied justice. And it's good. You know what? It's a good argument. I was willing to say, you know what? She's right. I think she made her case. I think she made her case in their opening arguments. Basically, she says just because it's the law, it doesn't mean it's just. And she goes on to cite a bunch of cases of what was the law, but was not just. And this is where she kind of plays loose, and they play loose with history, where they'll go and they start citing United States laws that were legal, but were not just. And then they just continue to Federation laws that were legal, but not just. And it's different. I mean, you know, we don't in the United States bring up, you know, British laws that were legal, but not, maybe they do. I don't see it, but not just at the time. Because, I mean, we came from them, but we're not them. We started fresh. But whatever. The first person to take the stand is Admiral Robert April, Commodore Robert April, whatever he's going by these days. And, you know, he starts off and he loves Una. He likes Una. So it was like, oh, everybody thought, oh, he's a good witness and you know, he wanted to tell, he's on Una's side. He wants to tell Una's, you know, Una's a great officer. But Nira decides to turn his opening, his, you know, witness, rather than hear all about how much he loves Una. She decides to turn the tables against him. And she's like, so you're a captain. What's General Order 1? And he explains the Prime Directive. And she says, so just to be clear, General Order 1 is now being called the Prime Directive, right? Yes. So it's fair to say that it's the most important law. Okay, fine. And then she goes on the attack, and she lists 3 or 4 times where he violated the Prime Directive. And he's like, well, that was a whole planet would have died. A whole civilization was going to die. And she's like, but you just said it was your most sacred law. And I just proved, you know, you violated that law multiple times. And all the Starfleet people are getting angry, and they're yelling at her, and they're saying, you know, you're not allowed to put Admiral on trial. He's not on trial here. You know, your client is. And finally, they end up saying that everything about Robert April, everything he said, is got to be stricken from the record, because she really made him look like I don't say like an idiot, but she made him look bad. So they decided to strike everything he said from the record. And that night, Robert April goes to see Pike, and you can see Robert April is angry with Pike, because he says, you were the one who got that lawyer, didn't you? And Pike is like, well, she's the best. She's the best in the quadrant, and she's Una's friend. And Robert April's like, you know, I didn't even get to say how Una, you know, what Una did at this battle or this massacre, or, I had all these good things to say, and the court never got to hear any of it. And he's kind of pissed at Pike for getting this woman. Pike offers him a drink, and he turns it down and leaves, and Pike ends up drinking both drinks because Pike is questioning whether he did the right thing by getting this woman, although I think he's pretty sure he did do the right thing, but it's going to be difficult. Earlier, when they were letting Una off easily, they were just going to let her go. She was going to plead guilty to this one count, and that was it. But Nira told Pike that she was surprised they were letting Una off so easy. And I brought up that she surprised they weren't charging her with sedition. Well, of course, at the beginning of the trial, once she refused to take the deal, and when the Vulcan, who's the Judge Advocate General, Vice Admiral Pasok came in with Captain Batel, and they saw the judge who was running the trial, they upped the charges, and they did indeed add 2 counts of sedition. And so Vice Admiral Pasok, who is again the Vulcan that Spock had a argument over, even though neither of them raised their voice at all, and is the friend of Sarek and Spock's most hated friend of his father. He's, for some reason, really interested in making an example of Una. And whenever things get too bad, he relieves Captain Batel, and he himself takes over. Okay, so after that first day of testimony, Nira and Una also speak. Una is like, you sure I can't be on the stand? And Nira's like, no, we're going to do this my way. Actually, I think they spoke about this earlier, but the point is Una really wants to take the stand, but Nira's like, no way, if we take the stand, we're going to lose. And so they're like, why? So Una is pissed. Una is pissed that Nira went after Captain April, or Admiral April, because she liked April too, and they were friends. And she's like, why? Well, how dare you do this? You're attacking April. It's not about him. It's about me. And this isn't about, and so she's mad at Nira, and she's realizing that this was never about defending Una. This is about making a name for herself, and for Nira to broadcast her hatred of the Federation, that she's just there to make the Federation look bad. And Nira's like, you don't understand. It's not just you. You're not the one who gets left behind. And Nira says, it's all in the past. And it's all in the past. And Una's like, we should talk about it. And Nira's like, that's exactly what I'm doing. She says, well, at least with me, what you see is what you get. Now, more than once in this episode, Nira brings up the fact that, like, some Illyrians can hide the fact that they're human, that they're not human. But with Nira, what you see is what you get. And I go back and forth, and I'm trying to understand, I don't understand why Nira can't pass for human. She looks perfectly human to me. She doesn't have any strange appendages, any ridges, or spots, or forehead decorations. She has 2 arms, 2 legs. She has female parts, apparently, where they are, at least the ones on the chest that you can see. She passes for a human woman to me. I have no idea why she thinks she can't. Okay, so we get to the second day of the trial, and they call 3 character witnesses to the stand, and it's La'an, Spock, and Dr. Mbenga. So La'an is basically on the stand. She talks about how she saves lives, and they break up the questioning so that all 3 are just intertwined with each other. So they asked La'an first, did you ever get the feeling that Una was hiding anything? La'an says no, she wasn't. Dr. Mbenga says that she was a great officer. She handled things with great care. And then they ask Spock, was she hiding something? And Spock says, yes, I did get the feeling she was hiding something. And the whole court comes to a stop. And we saw this in the trailer. And I called it then. It was obvious what Spock was about to say. So the whole court and the friends, everybody's worried. Is Spock about to drop the ball? And Spock says, so what was she hiding? And Spock says, an affinity for Gilbert and Sullivan musicals, because that goes back to the short track where Spock and number 1 were singing Gilbert and Sullivan in a stuck turbo lift. So they played it off as a joke. Everybody laughs. So La'an was saying that basically this happens so many times. And so La'an is on the Enterprise because Una was part of the team that rescued her from the Gorn birthing ship, planet, whatever, colony. And so I guess as a thank you for the people who rescued her, she decided to go to Starfleet, and then she ends up getting posted to the same ship that the people who rescued her came from. And that's a fine, great story, but that's the exact same story as Data, that Data was rescued from the planet, and the Starfleet people rescued him, and he ended up being posted. Okay, I guess he got posted to the same ship, but he ends up going to Starfleet as a thank you. That's the same story with Worf. Worf got rescued by Federation, and he ends up joining Starfleet. It just, I don't know. And this, is there time? I mean, has number 1 been serving with Pike long enough that this could have all happened? I mean, I don't know. The time doesn't make sense. How does Una become first officer so quickly that, remember, Pike doesn't meet her she is so young when Pike first meets her that she has literally just graduated the academy. She's then on the Enterprise, or it's then been long enough that she becomes first officer of said ship. Now, Pike had to already be a captain, right? I mean, you're not going to have someone who's not a captain be giving a speech at the academy, are you? You're going to have some random lieutenant giving a speech at the academy. She figured Pike was already captain. How many first officers did he have before Una? And then when did Una have time to go on a mission to save La'an? And then La'an had time to go through the academy and then get posted back to the Enterprise. And she's not new. She's not new to the Enterprise. She's been there a while. I don't know. Doesn't matter. The point is, La'an, Dr. M'Benga, and Spock give glowing reviews to Una, and she's a great person, and they're all happy to have him. And at no time does the prosecution ask the chief medical officer of the ship, how is it you missed she was an Illyrian? How do you miss that? Okay, because when she was a kid, their parents were afraid to take her to the hospital because the doctors at the hospital would have been able to tell she was Illyrian. So how is it that the doctors in a hospital could tell an Illyrian under close observation, but the chief medical officer of a starship can't tell? Anyway. So they asked Spock if the defendant broke the law, wouldn't the only logical course of action be to punish her? And Spock says he fails to see why Starfleet would punish itself. And that she is an extraordinary officer, and he's learned a great deal of leadership. La'an says Una is her family, and we get another break from testimony, and Nira is in Una's quarters again, and she asked La'an for a specific volume of the Starfleet Uniform Code of Justice. And it's a big book. It's a paper book. Why would it be in a paper book? Why would it not be accessible via the computer terminal? I don't understand, just for drama reasons, I guess. But this is the show where they're supposed to show us how paper books are stupid. I mean, they're doing everything future-wise. I mean, even if I asked for the Uniform Code of Justice for the military now, I wouldn't expect a book. I would expect a PDF. So they, Nira and La'an talk a little more about, hey, because it's not going well. I would say the trial at this point is not going well. And she's asking, so did anything ever come of the fact that you thought maybe they got this illegally? And she's like, no, I haven't figured it out yet. So Nira's like, maybe you better just tell me, what the deal is. What do you know? And so La'an comes clean, and she's like, look, I found out she was an Illyrian, and I got really angry that she lied to me, and I made a record in my private log. And so Nira understands now, and she's like, well, when did you do this? And a specific date. And she's like, so you think somebody illegally obtained your log, and that's how Una, became guilty. That's how they found out Una. And La'an basically, La'an is basically blaming this whole thing on herself. And Nira says, well, that's not possible. She's like, it would take, I don't know, 6 months for a Starfleet, for Starfleet to get permission to search a personal log. So there's no way it could have been you. And somehow La'an believes that, even though that makes no sense, because if you believe Starfleet would do something illegally, then why would they wait 6 months? It's the same stupidity that if we make a new law to make guns illegal, then that will somehow reduce gun crime. It's already illegal to shoot somebody, but if we make it illegal to purchase a gun, well, then that will stop crime, because surely nobody would want to break the law to purchase the gun illegally, even though they don't mind shooting somebody, which is already illegal. But so anyway, La'an feels better about her personal log, and also they take the time to talk about La'an's heritage. La'an Noonien Singh. She's like, are you related to Khan? Khan! And she says, yes, I am. And she's like, and you have? And she's like, yeah. She's like, not only that, I still have those genetic enhancements myself. So how is it that La'an made it into Starfleet? Her last name is literally Noonien Singh. How is it that they didn't check her DNA? I mean, she doesn't hide it. She just drank Klingons under the bus. She uses her speed and her power all the effing time. I mean, hell, how is it that she was the only one to escape a Gorn breeding pod? Because she was super strong and super fast and probably super smart. And nobody noticed, nobody checked in the Starfleet. Anyway, they have this heart-to-heart where Nira tells La'an that, you're not a monster. And La'an thinks she is. La'an is like, no, I've learned that and she's like, no, this is the Federation. They taught you wrong. They taught you to hate yourself. She's like, there's no more chance you're evil than anyone else. He's like, just because you're genetically enhanced doesn't make you a monster. And it's true. We saw for every Julian Bashir, there's a Khan Noonien Singh. But it doesn't make sure that you're going to be evil. It just means you could be. And if you are evil, you'd be really good at it. It doesn't make sense, though, that she would even carry so much strength, because, you're by 2 or 3 generations, you've got a fraction of the DNA. If you're 1 generation removed, you've got 50% of your DNA. 2 generations, you got 25. 3 generations, you got 12 and a half. 4 generations, 6.25. Okay. She's at least that many generations. So at most she has what, 6% of Khan's DNA, and she's probably a lot more than 6. She's a lot more than 4. She's probably 6, 8 generations. Remember, hell, the war was in the 1990s. If we're going to go with the eugenics war of the original series, Khan left Earth in 1996. So, let's see, how many generations yeah, I mean, she would have 0.5% of the DNA of Khan. The math doesn't work. The math doesn't work. And the fact that she would even have the same last name, that doesn't work. That doesn't work either. Anyway, Nira puts La'an at rest, says Una really likes you. She speaks highly. So if it wasn't her who turned Una in, then who was it? And now we're back at the court, and Nira decides to call a surprise witness. She calls Una Chin Riley to the stand because she has figured it out. Everybody looks at each other like, this is crazy, right? Even the prosecutor is like, what the hell? So, like, how long have you been in Starfleet? Una says 25 years. It's all you've ever wanted. And she says, you knew you were Illyrian and find yourself, I knew you were modified, genetically modified. Didn't you think to yourself you might find yourself in this position one day? And she says, I had been warned. And she said, why join Starfleet? And there we get it. The title of the episode, Ad Astra per Aspera. Could you translate that for the court and the viewers? To the stars through hardship. It was the Starfleet motto before the Federation. She learned it studying history. Why were you drawn to that motto? She said, I knew it meant we must endure hardship to get to the stars, but it also meant that the stars could deliver us from anything. And that in the mystery and vastness of space, we might not just satisfy our curiosity, our need for exploration, but we might also, in each of us, also find salvation. And Nira is like, well, why would you need salvation? Was your childhood difficult? And the Judge Advocate General Vulcan touches Captain Batel on the shoulder, and that tells Batel to object. She's like, objection, the defendant's childhood isn't relevant. And Nira just wants to establish context, that she's being tried for being an Illyrian. The court needs to know what it means to be an Illyrian. So they'll allow it. You grew up in a Federation colony on Voltaire Nebula, is that correct? Now this kind of breaks with Starfleet, with Enterprise canon. The Voltaire Nebula was the home world to that ship that Archer stole the warp core from. It would never have been a Federation world, but now Una is saying, yes, we were given provisional membership in the Federation the year before she was born. And Nira says, well, that was on the condition that all genetic modification was to cease. She's like, but it didn't happen, did it? She said it did for some, but for other families like hers, it was our tradition. We weren't going to give up our heritage. She's like, what was life like for your family under the Federation? And we get back to seeing her as a kid with this giant broken bone issue, and she's crying, and her parents are fighting. And I mean, meanwhile, outside, it looks like a wonderful modern megapolis, beautifully lit buildings everywhere, like fucking Disney World. They only performed their rituals in secret so they could hide. Those who could hid their modifications. When they were born, parents found out friendly doctors to deliver them. We knew if we were found to be genetically augmented, we'd be arrested. Did that ever happen to anybody you know? And yes, it happened to somebody she knew, a kid, a boy she went to school with, Ivan Katol. Oh, wait, that just happens to be the same last name as the lawyer. He was my best friend's cousin, meaning it was her cousin. What happened to my cousin? And Una says, some of us have immune systems that can glow. Someone must have seen him. He came home one day to find the word augment on their door. They had just learned about augments in school. Someone must have found out. Maybe it was a prank. Did anybody defend him, his family? Some people did, but there weren't enough voices. Ivan and his parents were arrested. He was 10 years old. They came in and they arrested a 10-year-old, and they put him in a cage, probably. How did it affect your community? Some families moved to other planets that weren't in the Federation. Probably a smart move. And those who stayed were persecuted. Circumstances became extreme. Sound like they were extreme. Oh, anti-augmentation laws gave freedom to people to act on their worst impulses. First were the insults. Augment, Mahdi, freak. They called her bad names. There were stores that wouldn't serve you if they found out you were modified. Even rumors could be dangerous. Then the attacks. Feared for our lives. Why didn't you leave? There was a fight at school. A boy accused another boy of being an Illyrian. Now I don't understand, is Illyrian? Of course they're Illyrian. They're on the fucking Illyrian planet. What the hell else would they be? I don't get it. Una tried to stop it and her leg got broken. It would have been a simple fix with modern medicine. But the parents wouldn't take her to a hospital because they were afraid. And despite her modifications, which was, again, built-in antibiotics, her leg became infected. Onira says she was very sorry. Was it a normal, common thing for things to become life-threatening? It was. And then the local government decided to divide us into 2 cities. And Nira is like, okay. And then Una keeps talking. And this is the aha. It turns out that Una, they divided them into Illyrians and non-Illyrians. But here's the thing. Una went to the non-Illyrian city. Dun, dun, dun. That's what happened. Her friend, Nira, went to the Illyrian city. Una's family decided to pretend to be human and went to the non-Illyrian city. So obviously, that was the last time they spoke, because I guess they didn't have internet. They didn't have a way to communicate. And how could, well, whatever. At the beginning of the episode, when Nira first meets Una for the first time in however many decades, Una's like, the first thing you're going to tell me is I told you so? Well, how could she have told you anything? So Una says, some of us could pass. We could blend in. And so we did. And we left everyone else behind. Our families, and she looks at her, our friends. We left them all. And she regrets it to this day. I'm so sorry. She says, and yet after the strife, you still want to be a Starfleet. Why? So one last question. How did Starfleet find out they were able to keep your status hidden for so many years? She said, who turned you in? I remind you you're under oath. And the judges caution her against badgering her own witness. She says, again, who turned you in? And Una finally says, I did. I turned myself in. This whole thing. And Nira says, why would you do that? Why would you risk your career, the life you built? And Una was just sick of living a lie, pretending to be someone she wasn't. She wanted her crew to know who she really was. She thought if she did, she'd finally feel safe. And Starfleet would finally understand Illyrians better. So she said, so Nira says, so after all of this, you still wanted Starfleet to accept you. Why? And she said, when I was 5 or 6, I remember a Starfleet crew visited. They were all so different. So many people from so many planets working together side by side. It was beautiful. But if all those people could work together, then clearly maybe she could be part of it too. She could be a part of something bigger. Starfleet's not perfect, but it strives to be. And she believes it could be. So you're saying that's why you turned yourself in. And she says, yes. And she says, because you believe in Starfleet. She says, yes, again. Ad Astra per Aspera. So Nira sincerely thanks Una, and you can tell it was a big shock to Nira to hear the truth about why this all happened, about how Nira is kind of shocked that Una really was kind of sticking up for the cause this entire time, that she wasn't running away and hiding finally. And the whole courtroom is like, wow. And now Captain Batel is about to get up because she has to cross-examine. It's obviously something she doesn't want to do. But instead of Captain Batel getting up to do the cross-examination, the Vulcan guy again puts her arm on the shoulder like, don't get up. And he himself will do the cross-examination. I guess it doesn't matter, but for what it's worth, at the beginning of the trial, they specifically asked Una, do you consent to having Captain Batel be the prosecutor? And she did. She never got a choice as to whether this other guy should be prosecutor, but I guess it's just something he gets to do. I don't know. It kind of seems stupid that you would have to agree to have the prosecutor. I don't think that's something you get it's certainly not something you get in civilian, courts. Maybe it's something in the military. I wouldn't know. But in a civilian court, you don't have to agree to your prosecutor. You would just say, no, I don't agree to that prosecutor. Oh, do you agree to this prosecutor? No, I don't agree to anybody to prosecute me. I didn't do anything wrong, but whatever. Anyway, so the Vulcan guy gets up and he decides he's going to, he's got to come in and do damage control. So he's like, that was a very emotional story, but emotions are irrelevant. Facts are not. And so he just decides to go on the offense. And he says, on what date did Captain Pike learn the truth about your genetically modified status? Nira objects. She says that this trial is about Una Chin Riley and that Captain Pike is not on trial. And the Vulcan says, I'm not hearing just one officer's violation of the law. This incident is an evidence of a breakdown in the chain of command aboard the Starship Enterprise, starting with its captain. If Captain Pike was aware of Una's fraud prior to her arrest, and he didn't notify Starfleet, he's guilty of conspiracy. Since my co-counsel neglected to elicit, he's basically throwing Batel under the bus. Since she refused to get testimony from Pike, he's going to get it. He will ask directly. So again, when did Captain Pike become aware of your status? And Una doesn't know what to do. Now, understand, and we saw this in the original series, that there's this light pad on the chair you're sitting in that your hand is on. And presumably that pad is able to tell when you're lying. So remember, when you're giving testimony in this court, you're also hooked up to a presumably near perfect, if not absolutely perfect, lie detector. So you can't lie. Okay, you cannot answer, but if you answer, you have to be saying the truth, or else the court would know. So she can't lie and say Captain Pike never knew. And they remind her that she is under oath and that she doesn't want to perjure herself. And again, they show the close-up of her hand on this light table. And so if she perjures herself, they'll know. So now I just don't understand why she just doesn't say, fuck it, I'm not going to tell you. I mean, she could just say, I refuse to answer the question. And yeah, that would be bad for her. But so what? I mean, it's already bad for her. And she brought this on herself. She brought this on herself. So I don't understand how she answers the question. Yet, like from Austin Powers, if you ask the question 3 times, she has to answer. And she does. Stardate 1224.3. And Captain Batel gets upset, and Captain Pike realizes that's no good for him. So Vulcan Pazalk is like 4 months, well before your arrest. For 4 months, the captain of the Enterprise engaged in a conspiracy. And the music gets fast. He has no further questions. And Pike is sitting at a desk on the Enterprise, and he realizes that his career is probably ruined. And Una is looking very sad. She realizes she just betrayed her friend and her captain. And so now we're back in the court. And although they didn't do anything, we're apparently in the middle of closing remarks. And the Vulcan guy is delivering them. And he's saying that the defense wants you to ignore the facts in favor of emotion, but the only important thing is the law. And by law, she broke the law, and she lied about it. And her own testimony has proven it. And her actions will also likely lead to a court-martial of one of Starfleet's most decorated officers, meaning Captain Pike. And the Vulcan is saying she is clearly toxic to Starfleet in both action and inaction. And the only logical response is to find her guilty of all charges. I don't know how that logic works there, Mr. Vulcan, but whatever. Nira now picks up the big book, almost like the Book of the Law from the original Judge Dredd movie. But this is just one volume, I guess, of many volumes of the Starfleet Uniform Code of Justice that La'an brought to her in Una's quarters earlier in the episode. And so the defense asked the prosecutor, Captain Batel, are you aware of Starfleet Code 8514? And you understand, she is the captain of a starship. Like, when did she become like a lawyer? I don't know. She seems to be really well versed in the law, that she can recognize one particular code by a 4-digit number. And she says yes, she is familiar. So they said, will you mind reading that code? And she opens the book. In extraordinary and extreme circumstances, if the following conditions are met: 1, any person fleeing persecution. And we go back and we hear Una saying we were persecuted, or fearing for their life due to political or religious beliefs, cultural engagements, or biological truths, may 2, seek safety within Starfleet. And so then we see Una saying, I thought I'd finally be safe. And then upon revealing themselves to authorities and making a request, they may be granted asylum. And she said she turned herself in. She wanted her crew to know who she really was. Oh my God, this entire thing, it's all come down to this was really Una asking for asylum. Una asked for asylum. Nira figured it out. See, Una turning himself in was Una asking for asylum. And by a Starfleet, so a captain is able to grant asylum when needed, and then later that asylum gets confirmed by a Starfleet tribunal. So Captain Pike merely granted Una asylum, and now this tribunal need only confirm it. So instead of putting Una on trial for breaking Starfleet Uniform Code of Justice, instead, we're going to turn this into an asylum hearing. And apparently that will work. The Vulcan doesn't say objection. This isn't an asylum hearing. He just accepts it. So Nira says, fearing for their life, one may seek safety within Starfleet and request asylum. And then he goes, Starfleet has a long tradition of performing rescue missions. How many distressed peoples has Starfleet aided? How many lives saved? She said Una knew this. She believed in the best of Starfleet, and that through it she could find salvation. The hardships and danger of her everyday life, dangers we face for being born an Illyrian. So they're saying that there was prejudice about laws against people like her. And even the prosecutor Batel is smiling because she realizes that the case is won. Una fulfilled the third requirement by turning herself in. She asked for asylum, and Captain Pike granted it, like all good Starfleet captains, including Admiral April. And all the times he broke the Prime Directive, he exercised his good judgment and gave her asylum. So now all the tribunal needs to do now is confirm that status to absolve them both. So that's all they have to do is confirm it, and then not only does Una get to go back to work, Captain Pike also gets to go back to work. And now she goes on, why she loves the law. Nira loves the law because the law is not a mirror to society. The law is an ideal. Well, yes and no. The laws can be ideal, but sometimes laws are written, to be 3,000 to 6,000 pages, just putting it out there, that there is no possible way any person can truly understand the law. And laws like this are added to the books every year. So don't tell me that the law is an ideal. Some laws are ideals, short laws, right? Laws that can fit on a Post-it note. The constitution, okay? Couple of pieces of paper, and it sets forth the very basics for the greatest government in the history of the world, and that was confirmed in the Omega glory. So don't give me any shit about it, Trek fans. Forwards. But no, not all laws are written equally, but I understand where she's going. It says it's a beacon to remind us how we can be better. We can be better selves. And she tells the judges that they have an opportunity to do just that. And she gives them the book. Mr. Pasak has made this case about the law, but by his own argument, we cannot ignore Code 8514 is also law. And all she's asking you to do today is to be your better selves, enforce the law that favors my client with the same dispassion as the laws that would exclude her. Years ago, the ideals of Starfleet called a young girl from the far side of the galaxy to service, not the far side of the galaxy, just pointed out. Okay, it was actually very close, not at all the far side of the galaxy. She was so clearly seeking asylum. So the judges, the tribunal, heads out, and then they come back, and they say they can all agree that genetic engineering laws are a nuanced one, and there were some very good reasons, and we need to keep the regulations so we never face another crisis like the eugenics wars. But these reasons cannot allow us to exclude every individual. We can't treat every individual, augment or Illyrian or persons with modified DNA the same. Line must be drawn here, and they must also shift when necessary. That's the exact opposite of lines being drawn. But today, we can consider what the defense has asked, and we judge the defendant's specific case, and in the unique circumstances, and independently, we grant the defendant's request for asylum. Lieutenant Una Chin Riley, not guilty on all charges. And Una and her friend are holding hands. And then Una gets beamed up to the Enterprise, and she's teary. First officer on deck, and she's looking at all her friends. And Nira is there, standing with the crew of the Enterprise. And she said, "You set me up. You figured it all out, my admission. What would happen if you put me on the stand? You knew all of it." And she said, "No, not all of it." But she says, "Thank you for saving my life." And Nira says, "What are friends for?" And she takes her hand, and she says, "I'm sorry we didn't do more for Illyrians. This was a technicality. And don't worry." Nira says, "It's a start." And she lets go. And Nira steps on the transporter pad, and everybody's clapping for her. And she turns around, and I was thinking, she hates you people. She confirmed it. She's like, "As you all know, I'm not the biggest fan of Starfleet." But she is looking at a starship crew that proudly serves under an Illyrian commander. So, like she said, it's a start. And she still looks angry. She still looks angry as she beams off, although she smiles when she says energize. Nurse Chapel is in this several times, but she doesn't have a single line. She doesn't have a single line in the entire, I don't think, in the entire episode. She's there smiling quite a few times, but never a line. So number one is like, hey, if you guys are all here, who's flying the ship? And Ortega's like, well, the thing practically flies itself. So Una tells everybody back to their stations. And Captain Pike comes over to her. One last thing to say. He looks at her. He's about to say something. And instead, he goes in for the hug. And he was scared. And then gives her a little tap on the shoulder. And she's like, good to be back. Good to have you back, number one. She says, good to be back, Cap. And Captain Pike walks away. And Una looks over the transporter room, which is empty, and smiles. End of episode. Oh my God, this was a long one. This was a lot of court. A lot of, you know what? I kind of enjoy these court case episodes. I think we could have probably taken 25 minutes off of this and still had the same episode that was, quote, as powerful. Aside from the Brogan, and this is just now par for the course these days, this episode chips away heavily at the episode Journey to Babel, because Spock didn't really have a relationship with his father. Spock didn't talk to other people, especially aboard the Enterprise, about his father and his father's relationships. So other than that giant plot hole, other than the fact that Una and her friend couldn't have left things how they were, how they seem to have left off in her testimony. Other than the fact that Captain Batel is seemingly a lawyer now instead of a starship captain. Other than the fact that for reasons unknown, Vulcan guy wants to make an example out of Una. I mean, it's not logical. There's nothing logical about that. And of course, aside from the fact that Una just decided to turn herself in, knowing that she could ruin the life of her captain and close friend, aside from all those plot holes, I thought today was actually an entertaining episode. It was an entertaining episode. Compared to last week's, it was night and day. Night and day better. Last week was a 3, and I'm honestly, on the Strange New World scale, this is easily a 7. This is a 7. Now, on the scale of all Trek, don't get me wrong, this is at best a 5. But for Strange New Worlds, I would say it's a 7. I don't really know if we're going to get much better than this season. I'd be pleasantly surprised if we do. And they didn't go anywhere. They were at Earth. Well, Pike went to the Voltari, nebula, where for some reason they purposely don't want humans. But you know what? if I could purposely keep humans away, I'd probably do it. I'd probably do it at this point. Anyway, 7 out of 10. You know, if Paramount Plus decides to give this episode away for free, like they did all the first season, yeah, it might be worth watching. So, with that, Kapla all, bird out.